Breakdown. I'm Angela Rae. For years, civil rights groups have argued voter ID laws discriminate and marginalize minorities. The debate over voter ID laws continues to be a hot-button issue on Capitol Hill and across the country. So, where do you stand? Do you support showing identification when you go to the polls? We're joined by Project 21 co-chair Cherylyn Harley LeBon to talk about voter ID laws. So good to finally have you in the studios.
Yes, great to be with you, my dear.
And this is a good topic for us to talk
Yes.
about. So you've got some interesting news about the change in voter identification laws in African Americans. Tell me.
So there's a poll that came out a few weeks ago that was a poll of 1,025 African Americans, and it said that overall, majority of those polled, Black Americans, support the president in his initiatives. They support him on the economy. They overwhelmingly support him on Obamacare. However, when it came to the issue of voter ID and whether they thought that state-level issued voter IDs were necessary, 51% said yes. And
that's counter to everything.
This is why it's so interesting, because that is counter to the narrative that most Black Americans are hearing, that A, either voter ID is not necessary, B, that it's too difficult for minorities to get, C, a litany of other reasons. What this poll showed is that that is not how a majority of Black Americans in this particular poll feel.
And it's interesting that you included, before you even talked about this, you talked about the areas in the poll where African Americans did agree with the president on the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, on the economy, on a lot of other things.
And I should add, in this poll, overwhelmingly, 86% said they support the president overall.
So why do you think the narrative is diametrically opposed to what you just found out in this poll? What is the problem?
Well, I think part of the problem is that there are certain groups, civil rights groups and activist groups, that believe that voter ID is obviously a bad idea. But the reality is that we have photo ID that was required for a number of things, as you know. Flying, alcohol, tobacco.
To get a job.
To show, when you go to the doctor, you need to show your ID, photo ID with your insurance card. So, really, showing ID to vote, to me, makes absolute sense, because, of course, we're exercising a fundamental constitutional right. And another argument that other groups will propose is that it is such a hardship for lower income people. They may have to take the day off work. But the reality, Angela, is that if you are getting some sort of assistance, whether it be Medicaid or food stamps, SSI, you are showing photo ID, because the government is not giving out or allowing you to have any of those benefits without showing valid photo ID.
Well, and let's talk about photo ID for a second, because really it only deals with a certain type of fraud, which would be someone impersonating me, when they actually go to vote. And that's a very low number. I mean, I think, look, I just want to look at Texas, and Texas, which is where I'm from, they had, 50 impersonation cases, and only 4 of those cases actually. So it's not even like it's a huge...
well, there is enough fraud that's happening, Angela. We have a woman in Mississippi. Her name was Lassa Della Sowers, who unfortunately was an NAACP official. She was convicted of 11 counts of voter fraud.
What was she doing? Going and saying she was a friend and a grandmother?
Yes, she was doing that. She voted 4 times for dead people, for individuals who are dead, and 7 times voted for other individuals, right? We also have someone in Ohio that did the same and just completed a prison term for voter fraud.
But again, it's not a lot of people. I just want to know.
But it's enough. And I understand what you're saying, but in my opinion, as someone who has worked on this issue for so long, and as former senior counsel on Senate Judiciary Committee, trying to maintain the integrity of elections, I think one time is one too many, because people are exercising a fundamental constitutional right, and I think that it is incumbent on the state legislatures to make sure that when I cast my vote, that no one else can come along and say that they are Cherylyn Harley LeBon.
Right. What about not allowing people to have as much time to early vote? What about changes in the law that impact people that way?
You know, I think, again, that's at the state level. Some states like early voting. They think that that helps reduce the long waiting lines. Other states don't want early voting. And I think, again, just like voter ID, that's going to be up to the individual states to decide whether that works for their state and their people and their citizens.
I noticed that the Justice Department said for federal candidates from 2002 to 2005 that there were 40 voter fraud cases. 26 of those actually brought convictions, and it would be interesting to see, you know, what were those cases? Were they, as we're saying, the impersonation cases, or what?
People voting, you know, Mickey Mouse and Adolf Hitler have been on ballots. And it's also worth noting, Angela, that, again, countering the narrative that's coming from the other side, states have made comments and have been asked, well, how did your elections go after implementing voter ID? Mississippi, as you know, just had a recent election. They said, their Secretary of State said, we haven't had any problems. Oklahoma, I remember when they instituted their voter ID, again, they said, you know, this went without a hitch. And I also might like to add, again, to counter some of the arguments from the other side, that have been said that you will see that if you institute voter ID, you will see that voter turnout will decrease. Not so. In the state of Georgia, when they instituted their voter ID, in fact, they saw black voter turnout increase.
Well, I think black voter turnout was pretty strong in Eric Cantor's race, now that you mention it. So the 2013 Shelby County versus Holder decision, where the U.S. Supreme Court basically said no to the majority of the guts of the Voting Rights Act, the whole preclearance that those states that in the past had prevented African Americans from voting,
let's talk about why they did that.
They no longer have to get preclearance for any changes to the voting law.
Well, actually, but the important part that the Supreme Court, the justices said, is that, you know, the Supreme Court is not in the business of making law. That is the job of Congress. And what I think is important for your viewers to know is that the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Angela, was based on 1965 demographics.
Right.
It is incumbent on Congress to update that law so that so it can accurately reflect 2014 demographics.
And so if
if
Congress did do that, what would they find? What is the accurate representation of 2014?
Well, let's just for a minute go back to 1965. We had a number of blacks that resided in the South then, right? And also you had, in the South, you had blacks living in certain districts.
Right.
Okay? Now, in 2014, when you look at those districts, Angela, many of them are majority white.
Yeah.
So again, you're applying 1965 standards to 2014, and they don't apply. So now what Congress needs to do is update that law so that it reflects the demographic shifts, the population shifts, moving. Now people have moved. For example, let's take a look at Detroit. Let's take a look at Alaska. Let's take a look at where you have a majority of people that have shifted and moved and have a law that reflects that.
Well, we also know that a big shift has come in the South, African Americans moving back after, the Great Migration when they left to go to various places up north or in the East. So how do you get around, Cherylyn, the argument that African Americans have a difficult time getting identification, and this is the problem?
Okay.
So
all right. So let's talk about that.
Sometimes I have a difficult time with that.
But why is it? First of all, I take offense that minorities have a harder time getting ID than anyone else.
So what does that mean, though? Does that mean we can't?
You know, isn't that kind of insulting that minorities, blacks, Hispanics, women can't figure out how to get a photo ID when we do need photo ID for all these other facets of our life?
So when we say that, what does that mean? Does that mean we don't have the money to go down to?
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. There are states who have, New York State said, hey, listen, we will offer photo ID at a reduced cost, $10. Other states have said we'll offer it for free. So again, we're dispelling these myths and these arguments. States are doing are coming up with options and alternatives for people so they can get photo ID. And again, Angela, if you require an ID to go to the doctor, to do alcohol, tobacco. Let's just take a cash a check. Let's just take a look at the liquor stores in some of our urban neighborhoods.
Cherylyn Harley LeBon with Project 21. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. Obamacare by the numbers. Our next guest says those enrollment figures don't exactly